Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Dawna. I'm here from Canada, and with me today is Lee Norris, and he is from. Want to share where you're from, Lee?
Yeah, I'm from the UK, and I'm in Bristol as we speak in this glorious sunshine.
Excellent. I expect that to be coming later today in Canada as well. So we're excited to have you here again for our series, our live stream series. Today's topic we're going to be looking is excited to learn, but how do we make it stick? And so one of the things we know about learning is we know that when we do that old school cramming, the reason we were said don't cram before an exam is because it actually doesn't stick. It doesn't actually go in our brain and stick anywhere. It definitely is something that we can have stick to our brain, but it doesn't stick in our brain. And so the old analogy of actually learning things in small bits, and small bits of information over a longer period of time will actually be something that actually often causes that information to go into our brains for us to be able to process it, to be able to think about it. But what we'd like to do is we'd like to take this topic, and I think we have our first question Lee can put up there.
Yeah, there we go.
One of the things that we do in our program is we look at the idea of driving forces, which is part of your TTI. It's a communication profiling, and our behavioral influences on how we learn. And so, Lee, would you like to start us off with that?
Yeah. So the different driving forces are, as far as I understand it, about motivation. And the behaviors and influences are like a disc type profile. So it's how we deal with problems, how we influence other people, how we engage with the world around us, how much it affects us, and how much we like following rules and procedures. So it's the TTI work that we do gives people real insight into how they turn up in some ways, and why they turn up how they are. And one of the really interesting parts of that is that some people have what we would call higher red and higher yellow energy, which can mean that they're quite fast paced.
Right, but we would never want to call someone red or yellow, so they would have more high dominance and influencing energy. So
yeah, okay, Dawna, yeah, that's absolutely. So that's okay. That's okay. I'm still learning, catching up. So it's these kinds of energies that we bring to the party, right? And what it means is that some people are more faster paced, they learn, and they're energized by other people in those situations. And other people, for example, might be more reflective. They might be, they might want to take some time to go away and have a look at some information and data. And that makes a huge difference in terms of how people process information and how they learn. So, absolutely. That's
so one of the things to think about is exactly what I did to Lee when he said the idea of using colors, and I automatically interrupted because when we start to understand our styles of things about us, that ability to be kind of okay with interrupting. So when someone might be teaching me something, if I don't understand a certain piece of it, I'll just maybe interrupt and interject and ask, which has got both pros and cons, because sometimes I will allow me to get a small bit of information, which will then allow me to continue my learning because the process now makes sense. I'm not thinking about something about what did that mean. At the same time, it also can get in my way from that ability to learn new things, to take stuff in, make it stick. Because now I may have changed the course of the way someone was planning on presenting information, or that information was coming. So as we start to think about our communication styles, about how we learn and the tempo and how we find things, it's an interesting dynamic of how that actually comes into play. And can I learn something and understand what I need to have, or is it not possible for me to really say that I have learned something and it sticks until maybe I have a high level of compliance, which means I really need to understand everything upside down, right, left, north, south, east, and west before I could actually say that I've actually learned it and therefore it can stick.
Yeah. And the other thing that illustrates, Dawna, is that we often can use labels. right? So you're a yellow person or a green person, or whatever it may
He's
be
just going to trigger me in like 2 seconds. So
Yeah, absolutely. But this is the thing, isn't it? That we can do that, and it's important to recognise that we're all different, and actually we lead with different types of energy.
Yep.
Some people are more reflective, some people are kind of more their kind of style of leadership might be to kind of take the lead as opposed to be more reflective, for example. And
right.
and
But saying that from a learning perspective, though, that when we are in a space, where we have trust, we're able to think from our prefrontal cortex, we're able to let our guard down and be vulnerable, then we have the ability to be able to easier sometimes move around the wheel in the way we learn and the way we communicate. Because when there's trust, we can think and we can be vulnerable. We see ourselves as facilitators, but I also know through my adult learning that then we can be more open to it.
Yeah. So I think there's an element of trust and kind of vulnerability and openness, which kind of cuts across much of this. I think so let me see if I can get you going even more. So sometimes when we do work with people who have been promoted, and then maybe senior people in organizations, people that are really successful in organizations, sometimes, do you think it's possible that people kind of can develop a narrative around I know better, or because I'm more senior, I've kind of learned lots of things that other people haven't? And is it possible that kind of mindset can get in the way? And I'm not using it as a generalization. I'm not saying
it can be in anybody,
are.
actually.
Yeah.
I think it can be in absolutely anybody, right? We can have that fixed mindset towards growth and curiosity. There's if you have a habit of doing something consistently and you're not open, and you yourself say, I'm not open to doing it a different way, regardless of title. But yeah, definitely, as we start to see, sometimes we get very comfortable in the way that we like to do things, or like to take information, the way we like to learn, all those bits and pieces, and who we even like to learn with. Sometimes it's this dynamic space of who we like to learn with. I only like to learn when there's certain people in the room. Well, what if we were to go? Yesterday, I was at an event at a conference here in Winnipeg, and the final speaker said, entrepreneur, very successful entrepreneur, said, the answers to our problems are in the comments. So her feedback is where she goes. So her concept of learning is actually to kind of go into the feedback that they get on all their different platforms and all the phone calls and things that they get to actually find. That's how she learns. And most people may not think of that as a learning spot, but the ability to be able to be really curious and open about that, to see that learning can come from different places. It's not the traditional, and being open to everybody being a teacher to you is a really interesting dynamic as well. Not only certain people of position or power for you to learn from.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely true. I think that's absolutely true. I think where I think I'm probably going with my thoughts process was that if that closed mindset, or whatever the right term that you used there was, Dawna, in terms of relation to learning, has kind of served you well up until this point. How do we as coaches, and how do we as leaders stay open to what you've just said, which is that everybody has something potentially to teach us all of the time, but we do have to remain open to that particular way of being in order for that to work. If somebody thinks that they don't, I've got nothing left to learn, then that becomes a narrative. That becomes a way of being, which is, can be problematic.
Right. So some of the things that come to mind, and I mean, my passion is business and learning, right? So I can be pretty passionate about this stuff.
Really?
Is that, yeah, not sure if you know that from being with me enough times. But the one of the things we start thinking about, the driving forces, is that space of like, lifelong learner versus learning when needed. And there's other language around that, but for practical everyday use, it's like, How is it that when I need to figure out the information I need to learn, if I have a certain way that I like to be a lifelong learner, but there's a certain topic that maybe, or a certain thing I need to learn where it's more last minute, I need to figure it out. How do I adapt and become comfortable with that? Because maybe it won't have as much time. If I have a team members who like to learn differently than me, they're motivated differently to learn in different ways. How do I adapt myself as a leader to plan and strategize that way? And if I need the team to kind of adjust and have a growth mindset towards these things so it can stick, what can we do there? Some people are also really capable of learning when things are more chaotic. They're able to compartmentize and put things into different spots, little Tetris pieces. And that can also have a very interesting influence on how people learn as well. And I should let you.
No, I think my reflection on what you're saying, because that is what you're describing are driving forces, and they're really, ingrained within us. Some people's approach to gaining new knowledge is about picking up books and looking on the internet. For some people it's about experience and trying things out, and there's a wide spectrum in between. For some people, my youngest daughter, for example, likes to put on this kind of what I call lift music, where it's like dum, 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 in the background. It would drive me mad, but she loves it. She sits there and it helps her concentrate. And what I'm minded to say is that being aware of those things, because they are motivating factors that help you. If you're more aware of them, then you can use them more intentionally to help you. And if you're more aware of other people's motivating factors, which is hard to be because they're kind of they're not always clear, then this thing about creating the environment for learning can only come through dialogue and a bit of openness about what works for me and what works for you. And if you don't have those conversations, then you might be missing a trick, right?
Yeah, and when it does come to that space of, how do we make learning stick? If we feel comfortable explaining to somebody that, you're starting to look into something that might be taking place 2 years in your organization, and others on the team are comfortable because you're not pushing it on them, but you can talk about it. It's a dynamic space of where you can create some really interesting conversations without expecting other people to take actions that maybe are not in line or not expected. And so two people, you and I, can show authentically as ourselves when it comes to wanting to learn and strategize around learning. Whereas other individuals will be like, I'll start next year, but this 2025 is meant for this. 2026, I'm going to start learning. I'm going to start diving into that. And the ability for you and I to really have a really collaborative relationship around that, and to be able to understand that we need different things and we're going to want to bring different parts to the conversation, is a really essential part to kind of making that learning stick, because I'm not hiding my learning.
Yeah, and you're kind of picking up on one of the other themes, which is about ensuring that this becomes part of our day-to-day practice, and checking in on what's working and what's not working, both internally, asking yourself, and also, environmentally, talking to other people about it is, I think, is really important. And one of the reasons why it's so important is because the expectation can be that, right, we've got this meeting scheduled and this is what we're going to do. And if somebody might just not be in the right way, state to engage in that kind of work, or maybe if you're very good, you particularly like workshops, because you're more fast-paced, that's how you work, that's how you think, that's what drives and motivates you. And you've got other people who are more reflective, they need a bit of time to look at things. That kind of environment might not be the right setting for everybody, and you could inadvertently be diminishing people's ability to join in sometimes, but without.
But I don't think people have to be one or the other, though, right? So this is what we will often do: is we'll say this person learns, this person does this, but the perspective of our motivators around learning. So when it comes to daily practices, we know that we need sleep to learn. We know that when the brain is exhausted and it cannot take that information, it needs to be the brain needs to be able to process that, think about it while we're sleeping so that we actually learn the information, just not just memorize it. And so this idea of daily practices isn't just about learning like the information, it's understanding that when we're learning, our brain's actually using a lot of fuel, right? We're going on a long drive. And so what am I doing to fuel my body while I'm learning? What am I doing and what am I choosing to snack on? What am I surrounding myself with? What kind of stress and parameters am I putting myself on to learn something? And so the ability for somebody to be able to interact in something, potentially go to a workshop, right? That, that extrovert might enjoy that interactive, but that ability to understand that you take that information in and it's like, oh, I found out something about that topic. And then you find potentially another source, or you hear something at a meeting that you might not have picked up before because you're like, oh, I'm curious to know how these things connect. And so I really want us to understand that those extroverts have the great capacity of reflection. And then the opportunity for thinking that way through, because that might often be what someone says. They don't feel that maybe people are reflecting, but people reflect in different ways. And it's an important part of learning that reflection can come by hearing something at a meeting that you learned 3 months ago, and that person's putting those dots together and then creating a new thought or idea or question that then they're going to move forward with because they're on a slow drip, right? A slow drip to learn.
And I guess what this also means is that having an awareness, so coming back to that idea about awareness of what suits you, maybe, how your learning style can adapt over time, how your learning style, more natural learning style, may be allowing or adding some value into the process, and also looking at the way other people's learning styles add value into the process.
Right. So when we brought this topic up, it was to sort of get out of some of the traditional ways of thinking about people being like this type of learner. That it's when you start to actually think about the driving forces, if you think of somebody who's very structured versus receptive, and they've been told, okay, these are the 10 days that we're doing learning, and this is all, and and if an organization was to say, this is it, well, a very receptive person might have that, but then they might decide that there's other things they want to do to learn as well. So then they'll incorporate that in. And so when you start to think about this space of how do we make it stick? Well, there might be steps and processes that you have placed in your organizations for your team to learn something, but understanding that different people are going to respond to that in different ways and being receptive to it. So when someone says, well, I'll just go and watch some videos on my own, there is that ability for someone to say, well, no, don't do that. We're going to learn together. Well, why would we want to stop someone's ability to learn? Like, what's the harm of going? If the thing about the trust is that when someone says, I'm just going to go watch some videos, they're trusting you to share what they're going to do. When there isn't trust in an organization, people will go ahead and do those things and not tell you. And so it's a dynamic space to start to think about how our driving forces impact our daily practices, and then how it connects to our brain actually being open to learning information. And what we really need, we need sleep, we need good food, we need trust, we need support around us on a very easy level.
And I think this is our conversation is demonstrating that it might be helpful to consider strategies, as we've written here, to encourage learning without putting pressure on people or without labeling people, which we've been kind of like playing with through this whole thing, it's important to recognize, as you're saying, that we're all different and we adapt and we do things differently in different circumstances. We might be more naturally able to learn with people that we're more familiar with. In some cases, we might, in other cases, people might enjoy the buzz of, and I know I'm using these kind of extremes, but I know that's not true. But some people really like the buzz of being in a room with lots of people that they've never met before. And it's, just thinking about your own learning style, thinking about the way that you like to interact doesn't automatically mean that is going to be the way for everybody. And this is really what we're talking about, is how we make accommodation, how we listen beyond the actual problems and issues that we've got on a day-to-day basis, but how we listen to the way that individuals want to engage with that work, is also really, really important, because they often know what works for them, and that deserves a voice, I suppose, as much as
I
actually the
I think some people have been taught, or they have labels based on what people have told them. But when we actually sit down with them and their driving forces, and we think about strategies about in a coaching situation, and you sort of potentially look at this and sort of they strategize on ways that they can start to learn or incorporate for large projects where they need to really learn new large amounts of data. And it's happening right now with AI, learning how do we bring these different learnings in. So there's definitely this conversation that they can have about learning. But when you the idea of today in this brief time was that to sort of explore that space of understanding those driving forces, understanding our communication styles, understanding the value of trust, right? Even between you and I, to be able to banter about the colors versus the name, right? You know, that ability to know that we can do that and say, like, come on, Lee, you know, that's my trigger. Like, what are we doing? Like, you know, that like drives me, you know, that's my trigger. So, but understanding what that can do to someone's learning, actually, because when you get triggered, or you intentionally are triggering somebody because you know it's something, what does that do to learning? It shuts it off.
Yeah,
absolutely. And so in the workplace, on a little bit of humor, if you saw last time's series on a little bit of humor and play, if you can understand the person might be playful and humorous in some ways, it can also relax you as well to learn. So the value of having fun and playing so we can learn is of the greatest importance as well. So
absolutely. Yeah. So there we go. And our thought maybe to leave you with today is, reflect on what we've done today, and, see what comes up for you. And then let's move beyond just learning and create an environment where growth can truly happen.
Yeah, for sure. So we have some programs, so it would be a shame just not to share some of the great work that we really enjoy doing. So in May, we have our open public program starting in May 13th, 2025 for both the time zones work really well for Canada and the UK. And also for Australia, if you wanted to get up a little early or stay up a little late. But also the idea here could be, you can find more information about us on changeinnovators.com. And as always, you can reach out to Lee and I on LinkedIn. And we look forward to seeing you at our next live stream. And thank you for being a loyal listener. Have a great day.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Ciao. Bye-bye.